Tonight, confusion and frustration for stranded Sunwing passengers. The delays, cancellations, and search for straight answers.
It really feels like we're moving into that zone of incompetency with communication.
The agonizing wait to get back home. How much money Delta is offering passengers of that fiery crash in Toronto, and why a Canadian law firm wants to launch its own investigation. The price tag and plan for a new Canadian high-speed rail line. Plus, the heartbreaking findings of a brain analysis belonging to a late hockey legend. And a Canadian-Peruvian partnership.
You cannot look anywhere at the festival without seeing a sash.
Stitching together cultures on opposite sides of the equator.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening. Hundreds of Canadian passengers trying to get back home are in limbo tonight with no idea when they will be able to return. The head of the country's largest airport said today Toronto's Pearson is in, quote, recovery mode, creating a massive backlog. CTV's Heather Wright starts us off with what's causing the delays and the cancellations.
Since Monday, David Masson and his family have been trying to get home to Mississauga.
So it's been a gong show trying to figure out what is going on.
The family of 5 has been stuck in the Dominican Republic after a series of winter storms and Monday's plane crash upended air travel. That Masson understands. What he says is frustrating is the limited information they're receiving from Sunwing about where to go and when they might get home.
It really feels like we're moving into that zone of incompetency with communication, with supporting their passengers. Their email handle is Sunwing Cares. That's what pops up on our email inbox when they reply to anything, but it really doesn't feel like Sunwing Cares.
Eli Nafik is also stuck in Punta Cana, experiencing a similar runaround.
Most of us waited up to 14 hours before we found out we were being sent to another resort.
Sunwing is not the only airline forced to delay or cancel flights. Airports across eastern North America have been catching up after last weekend's winter wallop. But the airline has struggled to restore regular service. As a result, it announced today it was canceling several southbound flights from Toronto's Pearson Airport in order to prioritize the safe return of customers currently delayed in destinations. This difficult but essential operational decision allows us to redirect our resources toward bringing delayed customers home as quickly and safely as possible. Sunwing canceled a total of 13 flights out of Pearson Airport today, with more expected tomorrow. The airline says affected passengers will receive a full refund within 21 business days. Omar.
Heather Wright at Pearson Airport tonight, where a team of investigators is continuing to piece together what led to the fiery crash of Delta Flight 4819. Today, the airline offered to pay each of the 76 passengers $30,000 U.S. CTV's Adrian Gobriel on what Delta's CEO is saying about the crash and why a Canadian law firm wants to launch its own investigation.
On this freezing tarmac in Toronto, the careful work of removing the charred, twisted remains of a Canadian-made Bombardier jet is the next phase of this active investigation. Delta CEO is now speaking out, saying the pilots who were in the cockpit of Flight 4819 are experienced in navigating challenging winter runways.
All of these pilots train for these conditions. They fly under all kinds of conditions at all the airports in which we operate.
Canada's Transportation Safety Board has a team of more than 20 investigators on the ground, though so far they've refrained from sharing any working theories.
The question investigators will look at is what caused that right wing to depart the aircraft? What were the forces at the point of touchdown?
The plane's digital data flight recorder, which has been recovered, is expected to reveal vital answers.
It'll have the G load when the airplane touched down to tell us how firmly the airplane touched down.
Drop it!
Some of the Canadian passengers injured in the crash have now retained legal counsel, their lawyers launching a separate investigation.
We want to see whether there are other parties that might be responsible. Those parties could or would include air traffic control, manufacturer of the plane.
Of the 21 injured, only one remains in hospital, though other travelers across the country are experiencing the aftershocks of this crash. With some chanting, "Give us our bags" at Pearson Airport, many have been left to reschedule their flights while trying to locate their luggage, lost in the chaos.
Vancouver to New York,
Yep.
stuck in Toronto.
Stuck in Toronto.
No bags.
No bags.
2 days.
We're scheduled to all go together on a Delta flight tomorrow morning, but we have no idea where the bags are.
Even once the plane is fully removed, a thorough inspection of the runway will need to be completed for damage. Currently, there's no concrete timeline for when Canada's largest airports will resume full operational capacity. Omar.
All right, Adrian, thank you. And there has been another aviation disaster, this time in midair between two small planes in Arizona. Investigators are on the scene outside Tucson, where the two private aircraft crashed into each other near the runway of a regional airport. 2 people were killed as a plane hit the ground. The other landed safely. The Prime Minister has revealed plans and billions in funding for a high-speed rail network between Quebec City and Toronto. But as CTV's Geneviève Beauchemin reports, there are questions about whether the project will ever take off.
The railway is woven into the history of Canada, and the plan says the government is for high-speed trains to build its future.
Today, I'm announcing the launch of ALTO, the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history.
Trudeau announced a consortium has been picked for a project that would see tracks laid along the Toronto to Quebec City corridor with 5 stops in between. The trains would reach speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour, cutting the Montreal-Toronto travel time in about half to 3 hours, a selling point to some travelers.
I do like the idea. Maybe it'll encourage people to leave their cars at home to travel.
The price tag is high. Trudeau pledged $3.9 billion just for the initial design phase.
Price tag, I mean, it'll be billions. What do you think of that?
Yeah, look at her face. Others have concerns about the reliability of the electric trains. Some light rail transit systems in this country have run into trouble. And to get Canadians on board, Trudeau is touting this as an investment into building up the country.
It'll stimulate our economy, strengthen the bonds between cities and our 2 most populous provinces.
Canada is the only G7 country without a high-speed rail line, and plans to get one rolling have hit roadblocks before. Some are skeptical trains will leave the station.
Mr. Trudeau is sort of on his way out, and the incoming people might get rid of it.
It will be up to potential successors, Liberals or Conservatives, to go full steam ahead.
This is a great investment in Canada's economy.
But there will be decisions to be made by the next government about proceeding.
Today, the Conservatives called this another Liberal promise with no details that will take years of planning and bureaucracy before a single track is laid. But proponents say if the money doesn't go into rail, it will have to go into building more roads.
It will take years before any passengers board. The initial design phase is expected to take at least 5 years. Omar.
All right, Geneviève, thank you. The 2 frontrunners in the Liberal leadership race backed the high-speed rail project, part of one of their final pitches on the economy ahead of 2 debates next week in Montreal, one in French on Monday, another in English the day after. Let's bring in CTV's Mike LeCouture. So, Mike, what was the main message from Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland today?
Omar, both Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are campaigning on fiscal responsibility, but they could be taking different routes to get there.
Yes, family.
Freeland visited a dairy farm in Quebec's Eastern Townships region, vowing that she will protect supply-managed industries like dairy, eggs, and poultry when renegotiating the North American trade deal with the Trump administration. She also reiterated that she believes the Canadian government should publicize a full list of American products that we would slap counter tariffs on. Freeland says it would create internal pressure on Republicans who could in turn make a case to U.S. President Donald Trump that a trade war would hurt both countries. A reminder, 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods could come into effect by March 4th. Mark Carney was in Toronto today, laying out more of his economic plan, including balancing government operational budgets within 3 years. And he says the key to his policy is to spend less and invest more in government projects that will have a wider benefit.
What we're looking to be much more disciplined around is the programs of the government or any direct investment of the government, that it catalyzes many multiples of private investment.
That policy and those of every other candidate will be under the microscope next week when all 5 face off in French and English Liberal leadership debates next Monday and Tuesday. Omar.
All right, Mike, thank you. Alberta's premier is defending herself and standing by her health minister after allegations of political interference.
I was not involved in these procurement decisions. I had nothing to do with the process decisions or the implementation.
This is the first government response to a wrongful dismissal lawsuit filed by the former head of Alberta Health Services. The lawsuit claims Neil Smith's staff interfered in awarding surgical contracts. Today, Smith launched a third-party investigation and announced 2 role changes within AHS. A key organizer of the Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa has been sentenced to 3 months of house arrest.
Freedom! Freedom!
Pat King was convicted of 5 charges in November, including mischief for his role in the 2022 protest. The judge took into account the 9 months he already served in custody. The conditional sentence includes 100 hours of community service, and King must also stay away from 6 other convoy organizers. The Prime Minister said today Ukraine must be included in peace talks as the U.S. and Russia met to discuss a potential end to the war, just as a war of words is heating up between Washington and Kyiv. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Melvin explains.
America's Ukraine envoy arriving in Kyiv here for talks to end the war.
Part of my mission is to sit and listen and say, okay, what are your concerns?
Coming as a war of words has broken out between President Donald Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Trump seeming to push a Kremlin lie, blaming Zelenskyy falsely for starting the war, even though Russia launched the invasion 3 years ago. Fighting for his country's very survival, Zelenskyy hit back, saying, I have great respect for President Trump and the American people. Unfortunately, he lives in a disinformation bubble fueled by the Kremlin. Trump lashed out on social media, calling Zelenskyy a dictator without elections who played Biden like a fiddle, accusing the Ukrainian leader of taking billions of American dollars to go into a war that couldn't be won and that never had to start, who refuses to have elections and is very low in Ukrainian polls. Attacking Zelenskyy, who was democratically elected, it's a nasty new low among key allies, shocking even some Republicans.
Putin is a war criminal and should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed.
Vladimir Putin is a gangster. He's a gangster with a black heart.
And for the president to argue that they were somehow the aggressor in this action is disgraceful.
Escalating tensions with Trump comes at a time when Zelensky's struggling to lock in Western support against Russia. Fearing it could hurt early peace negotiations, Canada weighed in.
It's a fundamental principle for Canada and for the vast majority of our allies that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin seemed to relish Trump's abrupt shift against Ukraine. The Kremlin even reposting Trump's tirade, asking, how long can Zelenskyy last? Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. The Canadian Armed Forces revealed today it's on track to meet its recruitment target this year. CTV's Rachel Aiello on whether that bump is because of Donald Trump's annexation threats.
So pressure's on. In an increasingly volatile world, the Canadian military is aiming to recruit and retain thousands more members within a few years.
We need to transform our military to adapt to what the threat of today and the future looks like.
Amid a long-standing personnel shortage, today, senior military officials gave an update on efforts to attract and train enough troops to hit their target of more than 71,000 regular force members and 30,000 reservists. From allowing recruits to begin basic training faster and expanding the applicant pool to include permanent residents, to targeted online ads and a more digital-friendly application process.
Right now, our recruiting system is not as agile as it needs to be.
The military is also no longer disqualifying applicants with certain medical conditions by default, allowing those with ADHD, anxiety, allergies, or asthma to be deemed fit to serve on a case-by-case basis.
any and all conditions are on the table for consideration for enrollment.
On track to meet their recruitment goal for the year, in the last month, the armed forces received roughly 1,000 more applications than it did this time last year. But officials stopped short of attributing that uptick to the surge of nationalism that's been seen since Donald Trump's return to the White House.
So far, we're not tracking anyone who's coming in saying that that's the reason that they're joining.
And as for the U.S. president's threats to annex Canada,
well, militarily, we're not there at all.
the Canadian Armed Forces is aiming to get back to full strength by 2029. But the military is still short more than 13,000 members. Amid calls from some to increase soldiers' salaries, today the Chief of Defense Staff wouldn't say whether she thinks the troops are underpaid. Rachel Aiello, CTV News, Ottawa.
Coming up, crunch time.
Hopefully we can go out there and find a way to win it for them.
Preparing for a big hockey rivalry. Plus, the disturbing delayed diagnosis for an NHL great. Word today from the Vatican that the Pope's health is stable and showing slight improvement. Pope Francis was said to have slept well overnight after being diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. The 88-year-old pontiff will spend a sixth night in hospital. He was first admitted last Friday for a bout of bronchitis. The family of the late hockey legend Bobby Hull says he had a brain disease commonly linked to athletes who suffer repeated head trauma. CTV's Alex Carpa explains how the diagnosis was discovered.
Nicknamed the Golden Jet, Bobby Hull was one of the most prolific hockey players of his time. Hull scored 303 goals for the Winnipeg Jets. He also helped the Chicago Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup in 1961, but the two-time NHL Most Valuable Player's successes on the ice had an impact on him off the ice. Hull struggled with short-term memory loss and impaired judgment over his final decade. Bobby Hull. Hull had CTE, the news revealed Wednesday by his wife. Deborah Hull wrote, "Seeing the pain and heartache suffered by his lifetime friend Stan Mikita's family, Bobby felt strongly no other family should have to endure CTE," and goes on to say, he insisted on donating his brain. Boston University CTE Center did a post-mortem analysis of his brain and found that Hull had CTE in the frontal cortex.
He also had it in a part of the brain called the medial temporal lobe, and that's a part of the brain that controls learning and memory.
In December, researchers at Boston University published a study of deceased NHL hockey players that showed 18 of the 19 examined had CTE. The NHL has consistently rejected any links between repeated brain trauma suffered in hockey and long-term neurological disorders.
We are getting much closer to diagnosing CT during life from all these, learning how to do it from all these brains we've studied.
Conversation around CTE mostly focuses on star athletes, but Tim Fleischer says it's equally as important to protect young athletes.
The biggest thing we can do from a sports policy standpoint to protect our athletes is to stop hitting kids in the head.
The NHL settled a concussion-related lawsuit back in 2018, which was filed by more than 100 players after a judge refused to give approval for the lawsuit to become a class action. And since then, several players have pursued lawsuits against the league. Alex Carpa, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Hockey's arch rivals will meet tomorrow night as Canada looks for revenge against the U.S. in the Four Nations face-off final in Boston.
We're a pretty hockey-proud country. I think that, people have a lot of pride, and hopefully, we're a team that's represented that well to this point, and hopefully we can go out there and find a way to win it for them.
Canada lost 3-1 to the U.S. in the group stage in a heated game in Montreal filled with anthem booing and fistfights. Still ahead, the race to save a buried snowboarder. A massive snowslide in eastern BC has claimed the life of a backcountry skier. Search crews found the body of a 42-year-old man buried under more than a meter of snow near the town of Golden. His friend survived the slide and tried unsuccessfully to revive his buddy before leaving to make his way to safety. A much better outcome was dramatically captured on camera after an avalanche buried a snowmobiler in Colorado. The man had been trapped for more than an hour when rescue crews finally pulled him out. The only clue to his whereabouts was a small piece of his airbag sticking out of the snow. And for the first time in more than a century, a new royal Egyptian tomb has been discovered. It belongs to King Thutmose II, who reigned sometime between 2000 and 1001 BC. Still ahead.
When I'm with those people, it just feels like you're with cousins.
Weaving together shared cultures and a storied past. Western Canada's largest winter festival is underway in Winnipeg. Festival du Voyageur celebrates French, Canadian, and Indigenous cultures. And as CTV's Michelle Gerwing explains, there's also another common thread.
So when a voyageur would get a contract, they would get a solid red sash, which was generally loomed in Europe.
The evolution of the ceinture fléchée goes a little like this: from solid red to a multicolored Assumption sash for those who could afford it, to a Coventry sash.
In the 1850s, they started making this pattern, which is really a copy of this other pattern, on looms in England, and now we had an affordable sash that was available to the masses.
Today, the Arrow sash is Miguel Villefort's business, a journey he unknowingly started in the early 2000s when the Métis storyteller and student was pining after an authentic wool sash to complete his voyageur regalia.
I didn't think I could make a penny doing this. I just wanted like real sashes, because all you had was like polyester sashes, the only thing you could buy.
He says historically most sashes were made in Europe and shipped to Canada. His sashes are imported here too. They're made in Peru by indigenous Quechua women.
The idea is like, a rising tide floats all boats. So if we do well, the Peruvians do well.
Most hired as single moms.
I'm just at the start of the new generation. We have three kids over 18 and they're all in university. There's 2 engineers and 1 nurse.
The partnership was first woven together 18 years ago when Villefort saw a woman hand-looming this traditional Peruvian sash at a street market. He couldn't help but notice the similarities. Since then, he's learned there's much more linking the two cultures together.
When I'm with those people, it just feels like you're with cousins.
The same familiar feeling he gets when he sees people wearing a sash proudly over their winter coats at Festival du Voyageur.
You cannot look anywhere at the festival without seeing a sash. So I think it's just really cool. It creates a certain atmosphere that's hard to describe.
Michelle Gerwing, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Beautiful craft. That's a snapshot of this Wednesday. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and see you tomorrow.
Canada's #1 newscast for excellence in journalism.
We begin tonight with breaking news.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina, winner of the Canadian Screen Award for Best National Newscast. Watch weeknights at 11.